The film kicks off with Iris and Paul, a couple deeply in love, enjoying a romantic evening together. That night, Paul had planned something special, taking Iris to the grand opening of Sky Tower, the tallest building in the city, a monument of luxury and ambition, freshly completed and buzzing with excitement. As a man with connections and charm, Paul had secured VIP tickets, ensuring their night would be unforgettable. But the moment they arrived at the entrance, Iris hesitated. The elevator was packed wall to wall, and something about the way it creaked didn't sit right with her. The max capacity dictated that only 8 people should be in the elevator at once, but the crowd ignored the limit, squeezing in as many bodies as possible. Paul, eager to keep the night moving, gently nudged Iris inside, and despite her unease, she reluctantly stepped in, surrendering to the atmosphere. The Sky Tower had been completed 5 months ahead of schedule, a fact that raised suspicions among engineers and industry insiders alike. Rushing construction that fast meant corners were cut, safety checks were ignored, and somewhere in the shadows a mistake had been made, one that no one was ready for. Once they reached the top, the pair searched for their reserved table, only to hit a snag. Paul's insider had been fired earlier that morning, meaning their spot had vanished along with his job. Denied entry, they didn't back down. Instead, they snuck into the bar, blending into the sea of well-dressed guests, careful not to draw attention. Standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, they gazed down at the city below, mesmerized by the breathtaking view. It was a moment of pure awe, the kind that makes time stop, where everything else fades away into insignificance. Paul returned with free drinks, but as they raised their glasses, Iris suddenly clutched her stomach, a sharp pain slicing through her. Unbeknownst to Paul, she was 2 months pregnant, but fear of disappointing him had kept her silent. A nearby singer, sensing her distress, soothed her, offering a kind word, his presence acting as a quiet reassurance. Later, Paul led Iris to the rooftop, hoping to get some fresh air. But as they stepped outside, subtle warning signs began to appear, typical Final Destination movie style, starting everything from a subtle chain of events. A woman's hat flew off in the wind, a child tossed a coin over the edge, small, seemingly insignificant moments, the kind that Final Destination fans know all too well. Then Paul did the unexpected. He proposed to Iris right there, under, or perhaps above, the glow of the city lights. Overwhelmed, Iris finally confessed that she was pregnant, expecting Paul to react badly. But instead of anger, Paul was elated, thrilled beyond words. He had always wanted children, and this was better news than he could have imagined. Iris, relieved and emotional, accepted his proposal, wrapping her arms around him, sealing the moment with a kiss. To celebrate, they headed to the dance floor, unknowingly stepping into disaster. Earlier, a shard of glass had fallen, cracking the floor, and now the butterfly effect was in motion. The coin the child had tossed earlier had landed in the worst possible place, triggering a catastrophic sequence of events. Suddenly, the dance floor shattered, sending people plunging to their deaths. Paul, desperately clinging to the glass, lost his grip, and in a heartbeat, he was gone, falling into the chaos below. Panic ripped through the crowd, screams echoed, fire spread like wildfire. Explosions erupted out of nowhere, turning the celebration into a living nightmare. The staircase collapsed, trapping those who tried to escape, leaving the remaining survivors scrambling for the elevators. But the overcrowded elevator was already doomed, and as it plummeted at terminal velocity, everyone inside was crushed, including a man who had only managed to get half his body inside before it dropped. Iris, terror-stricken, searched for a way out, but every exit led to horror. Then the building split in half, the entire structure failing like a domino, sending debris crashing down like an avalanche. For a moment, it seemed like things had settled, but then another piece of the butterfly effect hit. A piano fell, its weight pulverizing anyone underneath it, including a child who had foolishly believed he was safe. Now only Iris remained, but she wasn't alone. A young boy, trapped in the flames, cried out for help. Iris, determined, rushed to save him, but the building continued to collapse, leaving them dangling from the wreckage. Their grip weakened, their strength failed, and in the final moment, they fell into the abyss. And then, a sudden shift. The entire catastrophe had been a dream, a nightmare haunting the subconscious of college student Stefani Reyes, who woke up screaming in the middle of class, humiliating herself in front of everyone. For the past 2 months, Stefani had been plagued by the same vision, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. She confided in her roommate, revealing that she kept dreaming about a woman named Iris, And in that moment of revelation, she realized the unthinkable. Her grandmother's name had also been Iris. Stefani had barely stepped through the door when the weight of her suspension from college settled in. Her grades had plummeted, and with no other choice, she returned home, hoping to find some clarity. The moment she arrived, she was greeted by her father and her younger brother, Charlie, but the reunion was far from warm. Charlie, barely acknowledging her, carried an air of indifference, the kind that only siblings locked in silent feuds could understand. Despite the tension, Stefani agreed to take Charlie to their relative's house, knowing that avoiding him wouldn't fix anything. As they drove through familiar streets, Stefani opened up, telling Charlie that she had been suspended from college due to her failing grades. But the real reason behind her academic downfall wasn't just laziness or neglect. It was the nightmares. For the past 2 months, she had been haunted by visions of a woman named Iris, a name that felt eerily familiar, a name she believed belonged to their grandmother. Upon arriving at their destination, they were greeted by their relatives, Eric, Bobby, Julia, Uncle Howard, and Aunt Brenda. Charlie naturally gravitated toward Julia, barely acknowledging Stefani, making it clear that their bond had faded over time. Wasting no time, Stefani pressed her uncle and aunt for answers about Grandma Iris, but Uncle Howard's reaction was unsettling. He hesitated, reluctant to speak about her, finally revealing a dark truth. Iris had been a controlling, overprotective mother, someone who had driven Stephanie's mother, Darlene, insane. She had kept her children locked away, forbidding them from leaving the house, a shut-in who had ruled with fear. Desperate for more answers, Stephanie begged Aunt Brenda to tell her where Iris was now. Feeling sympathy for her, Aunt Brenda finally relented, giving her the address. It was a remote location deep in the forest, far from civilization. When Stephanie arrived, the place looked more like a fortress than a home, with high fences, surveillance cameras, and security measures at every corner. She pressed the button, introducing herself as Iris's granddaughter, and after a long pause, Iris allowed her inside. But Iris didn't approach her immediately. Instead, she reconfirmed her identity, making sure that Stefani was truly her granddaughter. Stephanie, determined to get answers, told Iris that her mother, Darlene, had abandoned her when she was 10 years old. She also revealed her nightmares, explaining that she had been dreaming about a woman named Iris, a woman who had died in the Sky Tower disaster. Iris, unfazed, told her that these weren't ordinary dreams. They were visions. She explained that back when she was at Sky Tower, she had experienced a flashback, seeing everyone in the building die, and she had done everything in her power to prevent it. Her efforts worked. She had saved everyone, but death wasn't happy about it. And when death is cheated, it always comes back. Over time, death hunted down every survivor, including her fiancé, Paul, ensuring that no one escaped fate. For years, Iris had kept herself hidden, avoiding death's grasp, but now she had cancer, and she knew her time was running out. She offered to teach Stefani everything she knew, writing everything down in a book, hoping that her granddaughter would learn how to fight fate. But Stephanie refused to believe her. Iris warned her that death would come for their family, but Stephanie dismissed it, thinking her grandmother was delusional. To prove her point, Iris left the house, and just as her book had predicted, she died in a gruesome, horrifying way, exactly as described in its pages. The incident shook Stephanie to her core, leaving her in constant fear, unable to shake the feeling that something was coming for her. Long story short, at Iris's funeral, Stefani's mother, Darlene, unexpectedly arrived, stirring a storm of emotions. Seeing her mother after years of absence, Stefani felt nothing but anger, furious that Darlene had abandoned her. But Charlie, fed up with Stefani's hypocrisy, snapped back. During college, Stefani had done the same thing, never visiting home, never answering his calls, leaving him just as abandoned as she had felt. Back at home, Stefani finally opened Iris's book, reading every detail, trying to make sense of the warnings. Meanwhile, at Uncle Howard's house, the family prepared for a barbecue party, unaware that death was already lurking. Darlene, trying to blend in, brought peanut cookies, unknowingly triggering Bobby's severe peanut allergy. Before the party officially began, Uncle Howard raised his glass, delivering a speech to commemorate Iris's death. But as the drinks were poured, no one noticed the danger. In one of the glasses, hidden beneath the liquid, were shards of glass, waiting for their next victim. Stefani sat alone in her room, the dim glow of her bedside lamp casting eerie shadows across the pages of Iris's book. Every word, every scribbled note, detailed the gruesome deaths from the previous Final Destination movies, each event described with chilling precision. As she flipped through the pages, A cold dread settled in her chest. She had a premonition, a gut-wrenching certainty that someone was about to die at the family barbecue at Uncle Howard's place. Meanwhile, at the barbecue party, Uncle Howard, ever the family man, extended an offer to Darlene, suggesting she stay at their house instead of living in a trailer. But Darlene, stubborn as ever, politely refused, not wanting to burden Howard and his family. As the boys bounced on the trampoline, Darlene's sharp eyes caught something alarming. It was a rake lying dangerously close beneath the trampoline's edge. Without hesitation, she shouted for them to stop, rushing over to secure the rake, ensuring no one got hurt. Not long after, Stefani arrived, her face pale, her breath uneven, panic radiating off her. At first, everything seemed normal, the party buzzing with laughter and conversation. But then, the rake slipped, tumbling onto the lawnmower, accidentally switching it on. At the exact same moment, Uncle Howard stepped on a shard of glass, his foot slicing open, causing him to stumble backward. And then, the unthinkable happened. The lawnmower's spinning blades met Howard's skull, tearing through flesh and bone, leaving behind a horrific, blood-soaked scene. The screams erupted, guests fleeing in terror, the barbecue turning into a nightmare. After Howard's funeral, Stefani, now fully convinced that death was hunting her family, gathered everyone together, laying out the terrifying pattern she had uncovered. According to her calculations, the next to die would be Eric, followed by Julia, Bobby, Darlene, herself, and finally Charlie. But her warnings fell on deaf ears. Eric and Julia, skeptical and dismissive, laughed off her claims, refusing to believe in fate or curses. Even Darlene, trying to calm Stefani down, insisted that Howard's death was just a tragic accident, nothing more. Days later, Eric, still grieving his father, buried himself in work at his tattoo parlor. After finishing up with a client, he blasted loud music, drowning out his thoughts, trying to push past the pain. In an attempt to honor his father, he inked a fresh tattoo of Howard's face on his arm, a permanent tribute to the man he had lost. But then, things took a dark turn. A bottle of alcohol toppled off a table, its contents spilling across the floor. Then a chain from the ceiling snapped, hooking onto Eric's nose piercing, yanking him upward in a painful struggle. Desperate to free himself, he climbed the stairs trying to detach the chain, and then chaos erupted. The alcohol-soaked floor ignited, flames spreading rapidly, turning the tattoo parlor into an inferno. Just as Eric freed himself, he fell, crashing onto the burning floor, his shop engulfed in flames. The next morning, Stefani, worried sick, tried calling Eric, but he didn't answer. Fearing the worst, she and Charlie rushed to Uncle Howard's house, only to find Eric alive and unharmed. His fireproof jacket had saved him that night. But even after barely escaping death, Eric refused to believe Stefani's warnings. He mocked her, claiming that he was untouchable, that death would never take him. He even challenged fate, laughing in the face of Stefani's fear, convinced that he was invincible. Then tragedy struck again. Julia, jogging behind them, was suddenly hit in the head by a stray ball, sending her tumbling headfirst into a trash bin. Before she could recover, she slipped further inside, trapped in a dump truck. Stephanie and the others saw it happen, racing toward the truck, screaming for the driver to stop. But the driver, lost in his music, never heard them. By the time Eric and Charlie managed to halt the truck, it was too late. Despite grabbing Julia's hand, Stefani couldn't pull her out in time. The compactor crushed her, leaving behind nothing but silence and horror. Stefani, devastated, struggled to process the loss. 3 people she loved were gone, but something didn't add up. According to death's order, Eric should have died before Julia. Then a shocking truth unraveled. Eric wasn't Howard's biological son. He was the result of an affair between Aunt Brenda and another man. Realizing this, Stefani knew that the next target was Bobby. They had to find a way to save him. Then a memory surfaced. Iris's book had mentioned one person who had survived death's curse, a man named JB. Darlene, suddenly remembering, revealed that JB was a friend of Iris, a hospital worker who had somehow cheated fate. Without wasting a second, they rushed to find JB, hoping that he held the key to survival. Bobby, terrified, insisted on going with them, knowing that staying behind meant facing death alone. Stefani sat in the passenger seat, her mind spinning with unanswered questions, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her like a storm cloud refusing to break. As the car rolled down the empty highway, Darlene finally broke the silence, her voice low, hesitant, carrying the burden of years of regret. She had spent a lifetime running, avoiding the painful truth. But now, with death closing in, she knew she had to face it head on. She told Stephanie the real reason she had left. It wasn't abandonment, it was protection. Darlene had seen death before, just like Stefani was seeing it now. The visions, the premonitions, the creeping dread, she had lived through it, and she had made the impossible choice to leave her children behind, hoping they could live normal lives, free from the curse that haunted their bloodline. Arriving at the hospital, they wasted no time, heading straight to JB, the man who held the answers. JB, now older and hardened, revealed that he had been the child saved by Iris during the Sky Tower disaster. For years, Iris had hidden away in her cabin, shielding her family from death, and JB had been her silent guardian, ensuring that her sacrifice wasn't in vain. But JB didn't sugarcoat the truth. There were only two ways to break death's curse. The first was brutal, killing someone and stealing their remaining lifespan. The second was dangerous, experiencing a near-death moment and somehow surviving. But the second option was a gamble. If they failed, they wouldn't come back. JB had accepted his fate, choosing to live out his remaining days, refusing to tempt death again. He told them to cherish every second because life was fleeting, and no one could outrun fate forever. Then panic set in. Bobby and Eric had vanished. Turns out Eric had planned something drastic. He was going to force Bobby into a near-death experience, hoping to cheat death. He had bought a chocolate bar laced with nuts, knowing it would trigger Bobby's severe allergy. But when he tried to grab the snack, the vending machine jammed, forcing him to fight with the machine until he finally got what he needed. Then they entered the MRI room, slamming the door shut, unknowingly activating the machine. Bobby, trusting Eric, ate the chocolate, enjoying it at first until his throat tightened, his breath growing shallow, his body betraying him. Meanwhile, the MRI machine's magnetic power surged, pulling in every metal object nearby, including Eric's piercings. One by one, they were ripped from his skin, leaving bloody wounds, until the wheelchair Bobby had been sitting in was sucked toward the machine, slamming into Eric, crushing him against the metal. Eric died instantly, his body mangled beyond recognition. Bobby, barely clinging to life, reached for the EpiPen in Eric's lifeless hand, but then another twist of fate. A nurse opened the door, and the jammed spring from the vending machine, now loose, was sucked into the room, striking Bobby's skull, crushing it on impact. Just like that, two more were gone. Now only Stephanie, Charlie, and Darlene remained. But they weren't giving up. They remembered Iris's cabin, the place where she had kept herself from death for decades. If they stayed there, they could protect their family, just as Iris had protected them. Darlene made a decision. She would stay behind, ensuring that her children could live normal lives. If she remained alive, then the next in line wouldn't die. But just as they prepared to leave, a coin slipped from Stefani's book, rolling across the floor. An old woman picked it up, unknowingly setting off the next chain reaction, the beginning of Darlene's fate. Long story short, they arrived at the cabin, but the door was locked. With no other choice, they crashed through the fence, forcing their way inside. Then, disaster struck. Stephanie's seatbelt jammed, trapping her inside the van, while the cabin, filled with gas, was one spark away from destruction. And then the explosion erupted, sending flames and debris into the night sky. Stefani barely had time to react before the trailer she was trapped in was violently thrown into the lake, the force of the impact sending shockwaves through the water. The cold wrapped around her like a vice, her lungs screaming for air as she struggled against the sinking wreckage. Meanwhile, Charlie, caught in the chaos, was crushed beneath falling debris, his body pinned under the weight of destruction. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, Darlene rushed in, her instincts kicking into overdrive. She pulled Charlie free, saving him just in time, but fate wasn't done with her yet. As she finished with Charlie, a pole behind her suddenly gave way, collapsing with brutal force, crushing her instantly. Charlie, shaken but refusing to freeze up, pushed past his grief, knowing he had no time to mourn. He raced toward the lake, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind screaming at him to move faster. Stefani's body was sinking, her movements slowing, her consciousness slipping away. With one final desperate effort, Charlie dove in, grabbing her just before she disappeared into the depths. He pulled her to the surface, his arms burning with exhaustion. But he didn't stop. He revived her, forcing her back to life. And as she gasped for air, they both collapsed, breathing heavily, hugging each other in disbelief. For a moment, they thought it was over. Stefani had cheated death, and with her survival, they believed the curse had finally been broken. Days passed, and the world seemed brighter, the weight of fear finally lifting. On a sunny morning, Charlie was getting ready for a date, his excitement bubbling beneath his usual cool demeanor. Stefani, smirking at his nervous energy, wished him luck, teasing him just enough to keep him grounded. But as fate would have it, the past wasn't done with them yet. Nearby, the old woman who had picked up the coins Stefani had dropped earlier was walking along the street. She fumbled with the coin, and as if guided by unseen hands, it slipped from her fingers, rolling straight onto the train tracks, wedging itself into the rail. At that moment, Charlie and Stefani ran into Charlie's girlfriend's father, a doctor who had treated Stefani after the lake incident. He casually mentioned something that sent a chill down Stefani's spine. She had never actually died that night. She had only fainted, her body shutting down from the shock of nearly drowning, but she had never crossed over. The realization hit her like a freight train. She hadn't cheated death. The curse was still in motion. Before she could process the horror of it, a train barreled down the tracks, its path altered by the jammed rail, slipping off course, heading straight for the crowd. Charlie and Stephanie ran for their lives, their feet pounding against the pavement, their breath ragged, their minds screaming for an escape. They dodged the train, barely making it out alive. But just as they thought they had survived, fate delivered its final blow. A stack of wooden logs, loosened by the train's violent derailment, came crashing down, their weight unstoppable, their trajectory merciless. Charlie and Stephanie never stood a chance. The logs crushed them instantly, their bodies buried beneath the wreckage, and with their final breath, the curse was finally fulfilled. Death had claimed its last victims.